Kit Carson, Part 4. The route which we had to follow to reach the fork led over a mountain that was difficult to pass. After some trouble, we crossed it and arrived at our destination, but found no beaver sign. On our return, we took a different route from that by which we had come. As we got around the mountain and were near our former trail, I saw in the distance 4 Indians. I proposed to charge them. All were willing and we started for them, but when we got near, we found we had caught a Tartar. There were upwards of 60 Indians in the band. They had surrounded us, and our only chance to save our lives was by instant flight. We fled, the Indians firing on us from all directions. We ran the gauntlet for about 200 yards, the Indians being often as close to us as 20 yards. We dared not fire, not knowing what moment our horses might be shot under us, and the idea of finding oneself left afoot with his gun unloaded was enough to make any man retain the shot in his gun. We finally made our escape and rejoined the party at the camp. One of our men was severely wounded, this being the only damage we received. On our arrival at camp, we were informed of what had transpired during our absence. It was then easy enough to account for the Indians having followed us. They saw us leave camp, and as they had had the misfortune to lose the animals they'd stolen, they intended to have our scalps. They made a very good attempt, but thank God failed. We built a fort and remained in camp for the night, as we could not move until the wounded men were properly cared for. In the morning we made a litter to carry one of them, the other could ride horseback, and then pursued our course, and in 4 days' march we found Gaunt. We remained at his camp until our wounded men recovered, and then started for the old park. We found beaver scarce, so many trappers having been there before us, and I and 2 others concluded to leave the party and hunt on our own hook. We trapped nearly all the streams within the mountains, keeping away from the plains from fear of danger. We had very good luck, and having caught a great amount of beaver, we started for Taos to dispose of it and have the pleasure of spending the money that had caused us so much danger and hardship to earn. We arrived at Taos in October 1833, where we disposed of our beaver for a good sum, and everything of mountain life was forgotten for the time. In Taos, I met Captain Lee of the U.S. Army, who was a part of Bent and St. Vrain and had purchased goods to trade with the trappers. I joined him, and in the latter part of October, we started for the mountains to find him. We followed the Spanish Trail that leads to California till we struck White River, went down it till we struck Green River, and crossed from Green to the Wente, one of its tributaries, where we found Mr. Robidoux. He had a party of some 20 men that were trapping and trading. The snow was now commencing to fall, and we concluded to go into winter quarters. We found a place at the mouth of the Wente that answered every purpose. During the winter, a California Indian of Mr. Robidoux's party ran off with 6 animals, some of them being worth $200 a head. Robidoux came to me and requested that I should pursue him. I spoke to Captain Lee, and he informed me that I might use my pleasure. There was a Utah village close by, and I got one of the Indians to accompany me. We were furnished with 2 fine animals and took the trail of the runaway who'd gone down the river, his object being to reach California. After traveling about 100 miles, the animal of the Indian gave out, and he would not accompany me any further. I was determined not to give up the chase and continued the pursuit, and in 30 miles overtook the Indian with the horses. Seeing me by myself, he showed fight, and I was under the necessity of killing him. I recovered the horses and returned to our camp, arriving in a few days without any further trouble. Some trappers came to our camp and informed us that Fitzpatrick and Bridger were camped on the Snake River. In March 1834, we struck out for the purpose of finding their camp, and in 15 days succeeded. Captain Lee sold his goods to Fitzpatrick and agreed to accept his pay in beaver. Lee then started for Taos, and I joined Fitzpatrick. and remained with him 1 month. He had a great many men in his employ, and I thought it best to take 3 of them and go on a hunt by ourselves. We passed the summer trapping on the head of the Laramie and its tributaries, keeping to the mountains, our party being too weak to venture out on the plains. One evening, when we were en route to rejoin Bridger's party after I had selected the camp for the night, I gave my horse to one of the men and started on foot to kill something for supper, not having a particle of anything eatable on hand. I had gone about a mile when I discovered some elk on the side of a ridge. I shot one, and immediately after the discharge of my gun, I heard a noise in my rear. I turned around and saw 2 very large grizzly bears making for me. My gun was unloaded, and I could not possibly reload it in time to fire. There were some trees a short distance, and I made for them, the bears after me. As I got to one of them, I had to drop my gun and make all haste to ascend it. I got up some 10 or 15 feet where I had to remain till the bears found it convenient to leave. One remained but a short while. The other stayed for some time, and with his paws nearly uprooted the small aspen trees that grew around the tree which I had ascended. He made several attempts at the tree in which I was perched, but as he could do no damage, he finally concluded to leave. I was heartily pleased at this, never having been so badly scared in all my life. I remained in the tree for some time longer, and when I considered the bears far enough off, I descended and made for my camp as rapidly as possible. It was dark when I arrived, and I could not send for the elk which I had killed, so we had to pass the night without anything to eat. During the night, we trapped some beaver, so we had something for breakfast. We remained in this place for some 10 or 15 days when Bridger appeared on his way to the summer rendezvous. We joined him and went to Green River, the place of rendezvous where 2 camps were established. I think there were 200 trappers encamped, awaiting the arrival of supplies from St. Louis. We had to dispose of our beaver to procure the necessities of life. Coffee and sugar were $2 a pint, powder the same, lead $1 a bar, and common blankets for $15 to $25 apiece. We remained in the rendezvous during the month of August, 1834. In September, camp was broke up, and we divided into parties of convenient size and started on a fall hunt. The party of which I was a member consisted of 50 men. We set out for the country of the Blackfoot Indians on the headwaters of the Missouri. We made a very poor hunt, as the Indians were very troublesome. 5 of our men were killed. A trapper could hardly go a mile from camp without being fired upon. As we found that we could do but little in this country, we started for winter quarters. In November, we got to the Big Snake River, where we again encamped. Nothing a moment transpired till February 1835, when the Blackfeet came and stole 18 of our horses. 12 of us followed them about 50 miles before we caught up with them. They had traveled as far as they could, being delayed by the snow. In endeavoring to get the horses, we fired some shots at them, but could not approach near enough to do any great damage. They had snowshoes, and we had none. They could travel over the snow without difficulty, while we would sink in up to our waists. The horses were on the side of a hill where there was but little snow, and our only object now was to get them. We asked for a parley, and the Indians agreed. 1 man from each side was to proceed half the distance that separated us, and to have a talk. This was done, and we talked for some time, the Indians saying that they had thought we were Snake Indians and that they did not want to steal from the whites. We replied that if they were friendly, they would lay down their arms and have a friendly talk and smoke with us. And they agreed to do this, and each party left 1 man to guard the arms. We then met at the place where the first 2 men were talking, and talked and smoked. The Indians were 30 strong. They sent for our horses, but returned with only 5 of the worst, and said they would not give up any more. We broke for our arms, and they for theirs, and the fight commenced. A man named Mark Head and I were in the advance and overtook 2 Indians who had remained in the rear of their party, concealed behind 2 trees. I approached one and Mark Head the other. Marquette was not paying sufficient attention to his Indian, who I noticed raised his gun to fire. I forgot entirely the danger in which I myself was and neglected my Indian for Marquette's opponent. As the latter was about to fire on Marquette, I raised my gun and took sight. He saw me and endeavored to conceal himself, but he was too late. I fired and he fell. The moment I fired, I remembered the Indian that I was after. I looked and saw him sighting for my breast. As I could not load in time, I commenced dodging about as well as I could, and he fired. As he fired, the ball grazed my neck and passed through my shoulder. We then drew off for about a mile and encamped for the night. It was very cold, and we could not make any fires for fear the Indians might approach and fire on us. We had no covering but our saddle blankets, and I passed a miserable night from the pain of the wound, it having bled freely and the blood having frozen. In the morning, we found that the Indians were in the same place. We were not strong enough to attack them, so we started for camp. On our arrival, Bridger took 30 men and started for the place where we had left the Indians, but when he got there, they'd gone to the plains, so we only recovered the 5 stolen animals which they had given us. In a few days, we set out on our spring hunt. We trapped the waters of the Snake and the Green Rivers, made a very good hunt, and then went into summer quarters on Green River. Shortly after we reached the rendezvous, our equipment arrived. We disposed of our beaver to the traders that came up with it, remaining in the summer quarters till September 1835. There was a large Frenchman in the party of Captain Drips, an overbearing kind of man and very strong. He made a practice of whipping every man that he was displeased with, and that was nearly all. One day, after he'd beaten 2 or 3 men, he said he had no trouble to flog Frenchmen, and as for Americans, he would take a switch and switch them. I did not like such talk from any man, so I told him that I was the worst American in camp. There were many who could thrash him, but for the fact that they were afraid, and that if he used such expressions anymore, I would rip his guts. He said nothing but started for his rifle, mounted his horse, and made his appearance in front of the camp. As soon as I saw this, I mounted my horse also, seized the first weapon I could get a hold of, which was a pistol, and galloped up to him and demanded if I was the one he intended to shoot. Our horses were touching. He said no, drawing his gun at the same time so he could have a fair shot at me. I was prepared and allowed him to draw his gun. We both fired at the same time, and all present said that but one report was heard. I shot him through the arm, and his ball passed my head, cutting my hair, and the powder burning my eye, the muzzle of his gun being near my head when he fired. During the remainder of our stay in camp, we had no more bother with this French bully. End of part 4.